Good morning. It is an absolutely gorgeous morning here in Iowa, and the sunrise is breathtaking. I can't take my eyes off of it, and I don't know that I have a lot of new things to show you in the garden this week, because things are definitely mature and we're just waiting for them to ripen so that we can harvest. But it's too beautiful of a morning to not do a garden tour. Forecast says that it's supposed to get beastly hot today, like in the 90s, which is very hot. And the kids are already looking forward to turning the AC on today and loafing around in the house. And my morning coffee this time of year is more like I'm sipping a little bit of coffee and harvesting some things. So yesterday we canned some pickles, and because my cucumbers are doing amazing, even though the dogs keep pulling them down. And like I said in last week's video, I really did not have good luck with cucumbers on the ground. So I still have pickles left that we canned last year, because they did so much better than I expected, and I planted so many, and I'm going to get a lot this year too. So next year I have to think of something else to put on my arch. So if you have some suggestions for me, let me know. I have seen people put pumpkins and watermelons on their arches. So if you have done one of those things, I would love your tips. The next thing that Hadass and I are excited to do is we are going to harvest all these zinnias, not all of them, but we are going to be taking a whole lot of them off so we can save seeds, and not just seeds for ourselves, for my garden, but hopefully we will be able to collect enough seeds where we can share them with all of you guys and some more of our friends. So that is so my scarlet runner beans that are on this side of the trellis, they have some nice beans on, and I'm gonna dry these and save them for the seeds, but they're kind of dying back, and I don't know if that's just because they have lived their life or if they've gotten choked out by my cucumbers. And then you can see the cucumbers are just loaded up there, and then also they would be getting a lot of shade from my sunflowers. So I didn't know if they're dying back because they're not getting their share of sunshine. And see, once you start getting cucumbers, there's just no end to them. There's another one. Anyway, back to the purple runner beans. I don't know if they're just, it's that part of their life where they now die back, or if it is induced by the fact that they're not getting enough sunshine, and we've had really, really dry weather. So when we get dry weather, and I know that I've said this before, when our grass starts turning brown, that's when I start thinking about watering my garden. Now I've watered my tomatoes, and I've watered my strawberries back there, and next thing I'm watering, I was watering these last night, and I had to turn it off because I went to bed, is my green beans. The green beans are actually looking wonderful. And how I decide what to water, so I just have like 100-foot of soaker hose, and I often lay that double, put it back and forth. So how I decide what to water is this way. What do I need on my shelves? Like, what do I have to have on my shelves? So all the tomato products, I cannot do without those. So tomatoes are a priority for me. So I start watering them, and I don't water them every day. I just water them maybe every 5 to 7 days if we don't get rain in between that time. So I try to keep the moisture level consistent. and we have, you know, we have the soil covered with grass clippings, so the moisture isn't evaporating a lot. It's not evaporating very fast. And also, the other thing that I take into consideration is, has it been wet up until now? Like, did we have lots and lots of moisture? No. So the key is to keep the moisture level consistent. That does less damage to your plant than excessive watering, you know, and then letting it get all dry. So you can dig down and just kind of see what the moisture level is. So tomatoes are a priority for me. I will baby those. I will put a lot of effort into those. And then the other thing is green beans. We eat a lot of canned green beans, and I still have some in the freezer from last year. So, you know, we could eat those, but they wouldn't get us through the winter. And there's just something about having canned green beans handy that I really, really love. So green beans are a priority for me. And then the other thing is strawberries. We put a lot of strawberries in the freezer, and if I don't water them now, they really won't do well over winter. They'll have a lot of dieback, and the plants just won't be vigorous enough to bear a lot of fruit next year. And don't worry about the sweet corn, because that's already past the stage of pollination. It's just filling out. So that is going to be fine. This dry spell we're having is not really going to affect my sweet corn, and I really don't need a ton of sweet corn. We use it mostly in soups, so we use maybe, you know, 2 times a month, 2 or 3 times a month we use sweet corn. So, you know, that's, I need maybe 24 to 40 quarts of sweet corn. And the cucumbers, I'm not really watering them because I have a ton of pickles from last year. So if this dry spell causes them, you know, to mature and the plants to die back, that's fine. My arch will not look as beautiful with cucumbers that are dead, but that is okay. I have plenty of pickles to get us through the year. So, and peppers are expensive if you have to buy them. And I noticed that my pepper plants, although they have beautiful peppers on, there's not a lot of baby peppers on. So I may have to buy some peppers to add to my pasta sauce when the time comes for me to make pasta sauce. But those are how I decide what gets water and what doesn't. Not that we have to conserve water, but I really don't need to put all that energy into watering things that I don't really have to have. If we don't get rain by the end of the week, I will probably start watering my black raspberries and my red raspberries. Not so much for this year's, because the black raspberries are already done. But for my red raspberries, I will get a nice fall crop if I start watering them now. So if we don't get rain by the end of this week, I will probably start watering my red raspberries first, because they are already bearing fruit, and then I'll water my black raspberries because a hardy black raspberry plant this fall determines how much of a harvest you'll get next spring. So the same as the strawberries. Strawberries, black raspberries, and red raspberries are my perennials that I have in the garden. So keeping them healthy and vigorous this fall is what will help them survive the winter. Such a beautiful morning. Oh, it's such a gorgeous morning. And while we're talking about sweet corn, I'm going to show you. And this is varmints, the 4-legged pet kind of varmint, not those guys. This is my dogs. They come down here and get themselves sweet corn. And no matter how often I scold them, they still come down and get some sweet corn. So when I want to check if sweet corn is ready to pick, I just open them up a little bit and check. This one is not yet ready. It'll probably be ready next week. And then I close it back up, and yes, The bugs do get in it a little bit when you do that, but that is how I know. Usually one of the signs that it's about ready is when that silk is brown, and here you can tell I opened up this one, and it looks like we'll be having sweet corn to eat by next week, because you can see how that one's starting to fill out. And I just close it back up. So here are my green beans. They are looking very promising, and I check on them quite often because when I plant things in the fall, the pest pressure is greater. So I don't see any bugs on them. Something was nibbling on them here, and I'm not quite sure what, but I'm just gonna keep my eye on it. And if more of it starts happening, I will, number one, the first thing I'll do is sprinkle some dog hair along the row, because I have a feeling that it was not a bug. I have a feeling it was a varmint of some kind. I'm gonna show you the peas that I planted from seeds that I saved. So they have sprouted. They haven't sprouted as well as I thought, but then again, it's been very dry. So I'm gonna water them when I'm done watering my green beans here, and we will see if that helps. My raspberries are just loaded with their fall crop. And these are ever-bearing raspberries. And you can tell that they are struggling with the heat. It actually looks like blight. But it's probably heat-induced blight, or drought-induced blight. And I have to wash all the raspberries because they're so dusty. They're so dusty from that gravel road. That is one thing that we do deal with living out here in the middle of nowhere. The roads are gravel. So in the summertime when it gets dry, we get dust baths every time traffic goes by. Thankfully, we get very little traffic. My cows are just munching on grass over there, turning it all into milk. So I'm now over here in the east part of the garden, and where I've got the red beets. I still haven't canned any red beets. I have pickled beets left from last year, and I think this year I'm just gonna can regular red beets, like don't pickle them. I just haven't gotten around to doing it. And that's one of the things that people often don't realize, that most of the time you can push off your processing. Like there's no need that you have to process red beets and pickles and salsa all on the same day. You can let the red beets in the ground until you're ready to process them. There is a couple things, like your brassicas, your broccoli and cauliflower, that's a little more sensitive. You might look at that and be like, oh, I really have to do that today. But most other things, you can wait a little bit. The next thing on my list for processing is salsa. I have all these little grape tomatoes or cherry tomatoes, and you can see how many of them are ready. And I don't know if it was a mistake or if I actually planned that many grape tomatoes. I usually just plant one plant, and that's just for snacking on while I'm in the garden. So I don't know how I got like 4 or 5 plants of grape tomatoes, but I'm going to use them to make salsa, and I'm gonna roast them first, like my friend Chas has been doing. And we're gonna make salsa with roasted veggies. And the peppers are right here. We'll use those to make salsa as well. And then I already canned a bunch of pepper cabbage, so I don't have a big need for more cabbage. And there's one down here, and I really should use that to make some cabbage. My broccoli, we're all done with. Nobody wants to eat it anymore. And it gets just a little bitter when it gets dry and hot. So I'm gonna let that go to flowers for the bees and the pollinators. I've been harvesting some celery and we're using it in our dishes. The watermelons, they probably should have water too. But like I said with the watermelons, they're not going to get us through the winter in any way, shape, or form. They are just for fun. So I'm not gonna waste any effort in watering them. We get what we get, and that'll be it. I have other plants that need water first. Here is my hot peppers. Last year I did a bunch of cowboy candy, and cowboy candy is like almost like pepper jelly. It's like a lot of sugar syrup, and I use that to make like a hot pepper dip in the winter time. But I still have cowboy candy left, so this year what I don't use for my salsa, I will be making pickled jalapenos with. And then my husband and my son-in-law, they will eat that on their sandwiches or on their, I don't even know where they eat them on, but they'll eat the pickled jalapenos. So this is my lettuce that I'm gonna save for seed. And here is the green variety, same variety. One is purple and one is green. So once the flowers open, see, you can see right there, there's some that are starting to open. Once the flowers of the lettuce open and start looking mature, I will put a paper lunch bag over it and staple it shut just to save any seeds that might fall out. And I'll let it a couple more days before I take it in the house. That's how I did last year, and it worked wonderfully. So hopefully that'll work this year again. My onions are still in the ground. One of these days I might pull them all out, but more than likely they'll just stay in there and they'll dry there, and then we will put them into the cold room. And I've had lots of questions about the cold room and storage for root crops, and I will show when we get to that stage of the season. I don't know if I can still do a weekly garden tour then, but I'll definitely show how we store our root crops and harvesting them and such. The other thing that we have down here is my raspberries, and they are really struggling with the heat. But with the heat and the drought. The new growth is looking wonderful. But all of those dead canes, I really need to get those out of there. And those are just this year's producing canes. So in the black raspberries, this year's producing canes naturally die back. They don't always dry back and die out right after producing, but mine had blight pretty bad, so that's what made them die back so fast. But I really need to get them out of there. It just makes everything look messy and icky with those dead raspberry canes in there. And then some of the new canes are not where they belong. On the ground. That one is trying to root itself and make a new raspberry plant, and that is how black raspberries can just take over your whole garden. So I need to trim that one and put it back where it belongs. All of these here, once they reach the ground, they will root. And I don't know if this one doesn't have any roots on yet. But that's their goal, is to lay on the ground and root and start. Sorry, I got distracted by that weed there. Looks like I need to spend some time down here weeding now that it's wet here from watering my strawberries. There's another ginormous weed that's got to come out. Anyway, so that's my project. Probably the black raspberries are my next big project in the garden, other than harvesting, of course. Harvesting and preserving is the priority right now, but I do have to take care of those black raspberries if I want a successful black raspberry harvest next year. But this is why, so talking about weeding and weed barriers. When you get to the stage where you're harvesting, like where we are at right now, I am so thankful that I spend 4 to 6 weeks this spring, probably most of the end of May and the beginning of June, covering up my soil with grass clippings and making sure I have weed barrier down, because now when it's time to harvest, I don't have to weed all the time. And I'm really not out here that much. I'm harvesting and then I'm spending the rest of the day in the kitchen, and it gets so hot during the day, so I don't want to weed. And then oftentimes we don't have sufficient moisture in August, which makes the weeds very hard to pull successfully. So that is why I spend so much time and effort in the early spring covering the soil, because then also you retain the moisture this time of year. Let me show you. So this here is where we've been digging potatoes, and this has not been watered at all, but it has been covered very heavily with straw, and I could not believe how it was still nice and moist all the way down here, which this tells me the plants that put down their roots nice and deep this year are really not struggling as much with this drought as I think they might be. And it actually would be a perfect time to dig my potatoes, because it's so nice and dry, like the dirt just crumbles off of them, and they wouldn't be hard to clean at all. However, if I dig all my potatoes, we still have the rest of the summer, and then weeds will grow here, and our growing season is not long enough to plant a crop now. It would not mature before our first frost date. So this ground would just be lying bare, and weeds would grow, and I'd have to, till it or cover it. So that's why I'm just gonna leave my potatoes. We are actually, so now that we're in August, our first frost date is September 15th. So we are just a little over a month away from being done with our growing season. So I often get lots of questions about fall crops, and we really don't plant a lot of fall crops for 2 reasons. Our growing season is so short, and number 2, I am usually so tired of full-on harvest by the time frost rolls around that I so appreciate things just dying, because I need a little break. So talking about potatoes, and I know I put that little text in there, but so the plant's goal is to reproduce, and I know I've talked about this before. Your root crops don't reproduce by dropping seeds as much as they reproduce by sprouting from their roots. So our plants here, so let's say potatoes, they do not know that the winter is going to be too hard for them to grow potatoes from the same potatoes next year. So what they're doing right now is taking all the energy from the green foliage down into the potatoes. And then the way it should work is then next spring, new plants will sprout from all those potatoes that were left under the ground. However, the winter gets too cold here, and those potatoes that are under the ground would all get rot and get mushy because our frost goes down that deep. But that is why we don't harvest our potatoes until the tops are completely brown, because the potato takes all its energy from that foliage down into the potatoes that are under the ground to store for winter. And most of your perennials this time of year, that is what they are working on. They're fully mature and they're just storing all the energy in the roots so that they can survive the winter. But they don't know, some of the plants, that our winters get too harsh here, so they really are annuals here. But in warmer climates, they would be perennials, the potatoes would be, because they would not die from the winter cold, and they would sprout the next spring from all those potatoes left in the ground. So the trick is understanding the plant's reproductive system and harvesting and growing it accordingly. Well, I'm gonna wrap up the garden tour. I heard the kids are up, the dogs are begging to be let out, and I should pick those raspberries so that we have raspberries to go with our granola for breakfast. And then I have to go milk my cow, and the day will just continue like that, one busy step after the next. But thank you for joining me on this walk in the garden. Every week I think I really don't have anything new to show, and then I get out here and I get started, and I truly am passionate about my garden. So I could probably talk for a long time about different things.